yesterday you started your sermon with...
I like this.
What?
I like this.
Okay. You started your sermon with the conversation about how it is Ascension Sunday.
Yeah.
And then the following week is Pentecost Sunday.
Yeah.
And that these two are paired together.
Yeah.
And so that made me think of iconic pairs.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going to see if we could like come up with some iconic pairs.
Yeah.
I came up with a couple.
All right.
The first one I came up with was peanut butter and jelly.
Yeah, it's like the first that comes to mind.
You have to, right?
Yeah.
Right behind that was chocolate and peanut butter for me.
Okay, I can see it.
Okay.
For sure. Yeah.
You got any? That I just sprung this on you?
Oh, man, my first one was peanut butter and jelly. I was like, that's the one I'm going to share.
Steven and I had a peanut butter and jelly costume for Halloween once. Like, we had like bread.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Bread and butter.
Okay, I'll take it.
Bread and butter goes together. What's another iconic pair? Oh, boy.
Bert and Ernie was one I thought of.
Oh, Bert and Ernie. That's a good iconic pair.
Thanks.
Yeah, I like that.
You
needed time to think about this.
That's so fair. I'm going
to think of like 20, and I'm going to tell you for the rest of the day after this.
I am delighted by that. That'll be hilarious. The rest of the week, you'll just be like shouting random duos at me. Batman and Robin.
Oh, there's a good one.
The dynamic duo.
There's a Instagram account that I follow called Bread Basket, which is just the name of the account, which is but it's these two brothers and they do all sorts of things. Mm-hmm. And they did a whole thing on this, and I wish I had it pulled up right in front of me.
On pairs, iconic pairs?
Yeah, so they'll make up a draft and they'll do 1 through 5 and just make up a category, and then they'll draft people onto their top 5. Mm-hmm. And one of them was iconic pairs like this. Now I'm like, I wish I had looked at that before.
I feel like if we were going to change it and be like church iconic pairs. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's people like Adam and Eve.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Or maybe like we always talk about like bread and water. When we talk about like symbolism, somehow we always put those together.
Yeah.
Or sometimes bread and wine, but by bread and water we usually mean communion and baptism.
Uh-huh.
Can you think of any like potentially church iconic pairs, even especially if they're weird ones?
I know. I'm trying to get some quirky weird ones.
Yeah.
You have to know I am so bad at usually on the spot things.
Yes.
I am such
So you needed some processing time. I understand.
What would be a good church one? Because that was my first thought, was bread, and it was communion and baptism. Adam and Eve is pretty good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, I have nothing because my brain's gone
You're
blank.
doing great. Samson and Delilah.
Samson and Delilah is a good one.
Pair.
Uh-huh.
I would also, I don't know if this is too weird, if this counts as a pair, or a pair, not a prayer, a pair. But the phrase, God is good.
Oh, yeah.
All the time. And like that, is that pair? I mean, it's like a call and response. I don't know if that counts.
It's call and response.
Or also like, the Lord be with you. Everybody does it.
Be with you?
No, that too.
Yeah. That's true. Paul and Silas, another iconic duo.
Oh, yes, great.
Way to go, Paul and Silas.
Love it.
Man, there's going to be, I'm going to have like 10 great ones at 2:00 this afternoon.
I am delighted for that.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
since it's not pressure.
Okay, great.
Some things are just better when they're paired together.
This is true.
It is true.
Yeah.
So we are going to talk about Ascension this week, and then next week we'll talk about Pentecost.
Yep.
And then we're going to wrap that we're going to move into like a different summer edition of the podcast.
Yeah.
So these two podcasts, 66 and 67, see what I did there? They'll go together like PB&J.
Yes.
And then we'll move into something different for the summer.
I guess I can mention the one pair I actually mentioned in the sermon.
Sure, you should.
We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions.
That's why I wrote it down.
Yeah.
From that.
Yep.
Okay.
Hold on. Before I moved that.
Okay, tell me.
Has that been in your experience? I was like, is this...
I was
that like always happens, and I was
like on the radio.
Yeah.
No.
Like if you hear "We Will Rock You," the next song is going to be "We Are the Champions."
So let me just tell you that now I will.
But you
hear
don't
that.
listen to the radio. That's the thing. Like we're not radio listening. Most people aren't radio listening people anymore.
I don't listen to the radio.
This whole phenomenon is sort of lost. Anyway,
I'm so sorry.
I mean, it's not like a.
Yeah, you seem pretty upset.
I don't feel super upset about it. But it was. I was like,
sure?
this is going to be a little bit of a risk. But then I thought the people who know "We Will Rock You" also have probably listened to radio for long enough in their life where they're going to know the answer to this.
I'm glad someone did, because I was like, I tried to be there for you, but I was like, I got nothing. I'm Becca. I'm the pastor of Family Ministries here at Katy First.
And I'm Mark. I'm the senior pastor at Katy First.
Welcome to the Katy First Family Podcast, where we offer ideas, inspiration, and encouragement to help you and your family grow as joyful disciples of Jesus Christ. This week, we are talking about Ascension. Ascension Sunday, and what it means to have lofty words and empty actions. That was the title of your sermon.
It was, yeah.
It was very lofty.
Lofty words.
Let me ask you a question first that I didn't write down. So
great.
Here I am springing more things on you that you didn't know.
Ready for it.
Can you define lofty?
I guess like something that just feels like it's so big and grandiose. That can feel slightly unapproachable.
Okay.
Or just so kind of like such a big deal that maybe it's a little hard to grasp, or it feels a little untethered to boots on the ground. You know, that's how I was using.
No, that makes sense. I thought, I'm not sure that's a phrase everybody is familiar with, probably most adults, but since it's a family podcast. Yeah. You know, you talked about how Jesus is Lord is a simplified phrase that is really encompassing a very grand and massive, I think those are the words you used, idea. Yeah. And we don't talk about that phrase. We don't even use that phrase exactly that way super often in church, which it used to be the defining phrase. Right. And I think it's still, let me take that back. I think it still is the defining phrase. It's just we don't talk about Lord, the word Lord, as much anymore in culture. And so putting it into church sometimes feels very maybe lofty, untouchable, unreachable for people. Yeah. But it's actually, it's simplified, but it's one of those where like sometimes there's the right word to use. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Especially since that particular phrase is actually a ripoff of the Roman phrase that Caesar is Lord. Right. And so there's this important distinction, which you talk about a lot, the church in Ephesus and the culture around it. Yeah. So you talked about how Ephesus is this massive Roman city, and it would have had a small church community in it that were in a minority culture. They would be different from the... Yeah. And I thought that was such important context for us to understand what was happening in the Bible. We often are, and I don't think it's a bad practice always, but we put ourselves in the story. Yeah. And so when we do that in pieces like this, I think sometimes we can run into some trouble. Yeah. So my question is, how do we now carefully and appropriately read ourselves into this story? How do we get this advice? I know this is like not in the totality of what you said, because this is really the heart of your message, but how can we like be careful, or what are some things we should be careful about when we try to read ourselves into the place of the Ephesians? Does this make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, I mean, I think one is just to always bring in that first, which, you know, I think probably for you and I, maybe others who, if they've been in a lot of maybe Bible studies that did this for them, like in seminary, they kind of drilled this into you a little bit, like to always have maybe a first audience in mind, and to be curious, why was this good news for people?
That's a great question to ask. Why was this good news?
Yeah. So, you know, and I don't think you have to So then it isn't like you go, well, then it has to be the opposite of what this is, but it at least gets you curious. And there's enough, there's probably enough notes in your Bible. There's enough, if you have one of those study Bibles, read that thing that comes before you read any book of the Bible, and it's probably going to give you historical context and all sorts of things that you probably skip over. Mm-hmm. But if you just take a second and read it, mm-hmm. it may add a lot of insight to when you hear these words and you go, oh yeah, this would have been interesting to hear. I think that's a good question to kind of like, what makes this good news that mattered in real life for people a long time ago?
I think one of the things that I've had to wrestle with, and I'm wondering if you have or if other people have, is that the cultural norm of wanting power, control, comfort. Mm-hmm. And by comfort, I kind of mean like the comfort that comes with being the cultural majority, mm-hmm. or like privilege maybe even is the word. I'm not mm-hmm. sure. The ease, maybe, you mm-hmm. know? Mm-hmm. The fact that we want those things naturally, because we just don't want life to be that hard. Yeah. It's not necessarily an evil. We just don't want life to be that hard for ourselves and for the people we love. Yeah. I think because we have that sort of natural instinct, sometimes I think we misunderstand what the good news of Jesus's message is. Yeah. Because it seems like on the surface, or I think a cursory reading, a careless even maybe reading of this, is that, the good news is one day you're going to be on top. Mm-hmm. That it could seem like you called out the three things that Paul specifically is talking about. Mm-hmm. The hope, riches, and the power of God, of Christ. It could be really easy to read that like, that comfort that you're wanting, that control you're wanting, that ease you're wanting, these things will be yours. Yeah. And I think that we can read that to mean you're going to be on top. Mm-hmm. And certainly I think the church has done that sometimes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that's what it actually says. And that's a lot of what you talked about. Yeah. I guess what I'm asking is what are some things like little tricks, tips that help us understand better what this good news really is? Do you understand what I'm asking? I feel like I'm asking all my questions in the weirdest way possible today. I'm using 15 words when 5 would probably be better.
All right. So is your question, what are some things that help you figure out why this was good news? Is that what you're saying? Or what do you at?
Not maybe why, but I mean what the good news actually is. Uh-huh. Because it seems like the good news is not actually that you're going to take over the place of the cultural majority, mm-hmm. right? It's not that you're going to even be accepted by them, but rather the good news is something that's like, this right here isn't mm-hmm. all, and that actually the good life is outside of it. Yeah. That's a good question. I think about, in our communion liturgy, maybe this is why this first thing comes to mind. In our communion liturgy, we, in the Great Thanksgiving, which is the part that I typically will do, there's sort of this recognition of gratitude for Jesus and the work of Jesus, and then a pretty consistent sort of line that says, he proclaimed the good news, he healed the sick, he did X, Y, Z, mm-hmm. which sounds a lot like what Jesus himself quotes from Isaiah. And so I think that's always a good filter of, again, and maybe that's why I said, why is this good news? I think that's maybe a good filter of like, what is the good news here that is either freeing people or healing people, or awakening them to their own dignity or humanity. And so like, I think that's
like for me personally, that's probably what I feel like I've been trained a little bit to prod and question when I read some of these.
That's fair.
Some of these. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but
I mean, I think I'm just looking around, and actually this is maybe too close to one of the podcast questions we got for the summer, but I'm looking around and I'm going, sometimes I see the church and Universal trying really hard to be culture setters. I mean, even in the 90s, right? Like we took, like the big thing with youth groups, right, was like, you gotta be countercultural. But really what they wanted was for the counterculture to be mainstream culture. And I just don't see that Jesus cares about it like that. I don't see that Christ is saying, yeah, if enough of us do this, then everybody will be like this. And this is really, I don't think that's quite the message. It's really, it's not about shifting things so that power starts to sit in churches. I think it's an understanding of actually power has always been God's.
Yeah.
Which is not the same thing as power being the church's.
Yeah. Oh, you're getting real deep.
Oh, sorry.
Here. No, it's fine.
I'm just so aware. What I kept flashing to during your sermon was I used to be a part of this Wednesday Bible study at a different church. This is a million years ago, probably more than 10 years ago. And it was a homogenous mix. Homogenous is not the right word. It was not homogenous. It was a totally random mix of people. So anybody that can be at a Wednesday morning Bible study. So there were like stay-at-home moms, stay-at-home parents, older retired folks, a bunch of church staff from around the area, because that's who could come to a Bible study that was 2 hours long on a Wednesday morning. And we did some pretty good study. But I remember this one time we were talking about something. I don't even remember what the context was. But this older man who I had actually grown really fond of got really heated about, well, you know, if we are going to be doing these things, maybe what we need is like people in places of government that like are working for us. And what he meant was like the church, right? And I was like, well, I mean, we have that. Like, I wasn't thinking about the way, because I was thinking of people who are in our churches, who worship, who are Christian, who also have jobs in government. I was thinking of specifically that moment of my dad, who was a lobbyist at the time. And I was like, we have that. Like, but I realize now that what he meant was people the church pays to go and to like, and when you were talking about what it was like for this church in Ephesus to be a small community in a large Roman city, I just kept thinking like, I don't think that they were trying to change the Roman like political system or the Roman cultural system. Even like, I don't think their eyes were set that large. They were just looking out for their neighbors. They just wanted to make sure that the orphan and the widow were cared for. And they weren't asking somebody else to do it. They were going to do it. And they were going to go visit the sick and feed the hungry and all of those things. And so I just got to, like, that's what was sticking. I don't know why, but that's what was sticking out so much to me as you talked about moving from empty actions to embodied actions.
Can I say two things?
Please do, because I've talked so much.
No, it's fine. Well, one, there's a book by, I think it's Reinhold Niebuhr. He's got a brother. I can't remember his brother's name. Called Christ and Culture.
Yes, I read this book.
I was about to say, you probably had to read this in seminary. It presents,
I did.
It presents 5 different approaches of Christ and culture that's similar to what you're saying here. Is it that God works through culture, God stands against cultures, God stands above culture, and it's like 5 different kind of ways of. So just a quick nod to that book because it's pretty. But also, what you just said makes me think. Like, I think that's very true, and you know, I think I may have mentioned this a couple weeks ago. I'm still in the book of Acts, just kind of slowly reading it. And one of the charges against Paul and Silas is that they are overturning the world.
What a cool charge.
Right? I know, it is such a cool, but it's a very serious charge. Like in Roman world, that's a very quick way to become an enemy of the state. And so we get evidence of this. I mean, if you go into the end of Ephesians itself, so we're in Ephesians, you go to the end of Ephesians itself, and you get what's known as the household codes, right? So an address to husbands, wives, slaves, children. And for probably many people, especially if you didn't grow up in the church, you would read this and go, oh, this is bad stuff. It feels very patriarchal. It feels like it's endorsing slavery. It feels like it's endorsing this just a whole bunch of stuff. But it's a great example of what you're saying, that if Paul just overturned every cultural norm and said, here's the new way, that none of us would be Christians today, because Christianity would not have lasted. It would have been squelched. And so that's a great example of Paul taking a cultural standard, and I don't know, maybe he agreed with it, maybe he didn't, maybe he's a product of his day, is not, but what he does is he at least inserts the ethic of Christ-like love into it, which does change
how people relate. So
it doesn't overturn. The household code is like the basic microcosm of Roman culture. If you upset the cart here, your little upstart religion's not going to make it. And so it's a great example of, hey, he's not trying to overturn it in such a way that in our day today, we would overturn this, and we would say it's because of our faith that we would say this is not good. But he inserts an ethic of Christ love that I think sets the trajectory that eventually overturns that same sort of mentality. So I think it's a good example of, I think you're right. I don't think first century Christians were trying to become the new Roman Empire.
Yeah.
I don't think they cared to. I think, I'm not even sure they had the imagination that it needed to happen. But I think it's also, and I kind of ended the sermon on this too, that's all grasping for power.
Yeah.
And it is the temptation for all of us to grasp for power. And what Paul does so beautifully here is he encourages the people who would have very good reason to grasp for power to say, you already have the power of Christ. Let that live. So don't grasp for it. And let that be what lives through you. And that, I think, is such a powerful message. I would think, to the people at Ephesus, and such one that's such a good comfort and sort of challenged us today.
Yeah. I just think it's so difficult for us. I feel like I'm constantly having to, I have the idea, I understand, and then it's like so much of, our brains are just sort of programmed, or they're getting all these messages all the time. So then I have to remind myself again to come back to this this saving work isn't something that I'm going to earn, or like some of these things that are basic that we know, but then we don't live like that all the time.
Yes.
So we have to come back and remind ourselves, oh, nope, I'm not trying to grasp for this, or I'm not trying to take this, or I'm not just going, well, God will sort it out either, right? Like, it's this constant reminder, which is part of why we need the church.
Yeah.
We need the community of people to go, no, you're doing good.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's tricky.
Yeah. It is tricky. It's part of why I like preaching on the ascension in particular, because it's sort of I think we sort of assume the implications of it a little bit, or if we don't dig into it a little bit, it becomes easy to accidentally turn it into something that it's not.
Okay.
That does sort of make us power-hungry Christians, or arrogantly powerful Christians. But if you sort of look and sitting with how Paul talks about it, it ought to redefine for us constantly our ideas of power and our ideas of what it means for us to be people who claim Jesus is Lord. Well, what does that mean for everyday life? And what's significance for that? So it's always kind of fun and challenging for me to look at this. One
of the things that sometimes I've talked about with different groups of people, or even I used to pray this all the time when I'd pray for like the offering. I'd be like, we are people who proclaim that Jesus is Lord, which means nothing else and no one else can be. And so then I would talk about how that means that we turn every second, every cent, every one of our skills over, whatever that means. And I, for me, that's a helpful reframing. I don't know that that's helpful for everybody, so use it only if it's helpful. But when I am trying to grasp for, it's not really power, it's control. I really wish I had more control. When I'm trying to grasp for that, remembering that Jesus is Lord, so that even actually the outcome doesn't matter. Does that make sense? That for me is helpful. But I can see where that statement for different people is going to hit different places and also different times of our life. Yeah. But it's a powerful one.
Yeah.
So you already talked a lot about the ascension, but I did want to talk about how you do this thing, Mark, sometimes, almost every time when you preach, where you will say something really profound and you almost just throw it away. Like you just, like you just say it so quick. And I'm like, whoa, that's a whole sermon right there, my friend. But you said that ascension is actually from here. It's not from here. It's from here to everywhere. Yeah. So can you talk more about what that means?
Sure. Yeah. So, and probably the reason I ran by this and is, like with these sort of one-off Sundays. Yeah. You're either preaching on the same text every year or slightly, and it's the same theme every year. Yeah. So you have to be like kind of mindful. Yeah. And so like, I think it was either last year or maybe the year before you were here, I had a whole sermon about how ascension is not from here to there, it's here to everywhere.
I don't think I wasn't here.
And so that's probably why I ran through it. Because I was like, I've said this before, but I'm going to, but yeah. And then after service, Shelley Williams, one of the pastors in our church, brought a great Barbara Brown Taylor quote to me that I wish I could remember in the moment. But there's a great one, and I'll go find it. Okay. I think that's always a great reminder.
Is that the end of your comment? There's a great Barbara Brown Taylor quote about the ascension, but I don't remember anything about it.
She said it to me, and I don't have great recall. And so I wish I could remember it, but it captured the same idea. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to say that for next time. But, when I think of the ascension, sometimes I always use the image of like the ending of Grease. You think of Jesus just riding up in the clouds. That's hilarious. So then our mindset even of what heaven is, and N.T. Wright writes a lot about this concept too, that heaven is just this alternate space that we'll go to one day that's somewhere up in the clouds. And so to sort of modify what Scripture is speaking about is not a sense of a different place. Up language is always language of going to somewhere of great importance. And so the good example of this is if every time you read about Jerusalem, you always go up to Jerusalem, no matter where you are, whether it's north, south, east, or west. And if you're going away from Jerusalem, you're always going down from Jerusalem. Again, no matter direction, no matter if you're going south or if you're going north, it's always going to be you're going down to this city. And why? Well, it's because Jerusalem is this ascent. It's language of going up to. It's language of importance. And so when Jesus ascends, it's not just a relational of up in the clouds. It's a language of where Christ sits and reigns, and where he reigns is in heaven. And so it's better to think of not from here to there, but here to now in the space of heaven filling all things, Christ's power and presence. Yeah. That's the more proper, I think, understanding of ascension, of not Jesus is gone away from us, but that God's presence in Christ is now all around us because Christ is in heaven and on the throne.
I did a quick Google.
Okay.
And I found a quote.
Okay. Let's see if this is it.
But I don't know. Yeah. Stop looking up. Better to look around instead at each other, at the world, at the ordinary people in your lives, because that was where they were most likely to find Christ, not in his own body, but in their bodies.
It's not it, but it's a good one.
It is a good one.
It fits.
There's like a lot. I wonder what book that one's from. Anyway. Okay. I love Barbara Brown Taylor.
Yeah. She's kind of good.
I just think that's especially paired with Pentecost,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll talk more about that next week.
Yeah.
But I don't know why I'm taking off with my arms. You can't see me if you're just listening, but I am apparently flying. Sorry, I don't know why. One of the things you talked about too that I thought was really meaningful is the Lydia Patterson Institute.
Mm-hmm.
So could you say a little bit more about Lydia Patterson?
Yeah, and you can pipe in where I'm
I'll do my
stuff.
best.
So Lydia Patterson Institute is a private school in El Paso that is, just across the border, right up next to the border with Juarez, just on the other side, and begun by Lydia Patterson in the early 1900s, where she was noticing kids who spoke only Spanish had no educational opportunities because Texas didn't offer any second language. And so she began to host or began to establish a school in homes. And then she died, and her husband continued her legacy with the Lydia Patterson Institute, which has been particular for helping kids who are looking for an English second language, and particularly those just on the other side of the border. And so they're one of the partners of our whole jurisdiction, which is South Central. Is that where we are? Yeah, South Central jurisdiction. And so our jurisdiction supports the Lydia Patterson Institute and the work that they do. And so I always love hearing the work every year because it feels so meaningful, and especially in our moment with such issues around immigration and the border and what do we do as a church. It's so nice, Deb, that there is a long-standing relationship with Lydia Patterson Institute, who's been doing such good work for so many years. And there's so many people who've been impacted by Lydia Patterson, who've gone on and done incredible things. So they're, I think one of the things I shared, just as they had 100% graduation rate, 100% college acceptance rate from their graduating class. And it just this week connected as I was thinking about this text and thinking about this small community in Ephesus and what's it mean for hope, riches, and power to be in their life. And then hearing Lydia Patterson and thinking, this feels more close to what would have felt like an original community, a smaller community who's amongst a dominant culture that hope, riches, and power through this school have become a reality. And so it kind of made it for me, and I hope in the sermon, sort of relocate this scripture for a moment before it's even back to us yet. Say, imagine what these words mean for this community who's doing such great work. It was such a cool organization, and I only know it by what I've heard. So
yeah, I've never been there. I have met students from there, and worked in a church once where we had an intern that was a student from there. They do that in the summer, and we're still like Facebook friends, just because I like watching the cool things she does with her life. But I think the beautiful thing about Lydia Patterson is I think they're a great example of actually what we were talking about at the beginning of they're not grasping for power, and they are actively changing the world, but they're not trying to do it in some sort of systematic way, as far as they're not trying to go to where power already exists and turn that over. Instead, they're seeing people and seeing a need and intentionally moving to meet that need. And every time the need shifts, right, or grows or evolves, so does the Institute, because it's not founded on this is what people need. It's genuinely founded on a desire to love people well. And so what that needs to look like morphs and changes over time. And I remember a lot of the students come across the bridge from Juarez into El Paso. It makes for very long days for those students. And yet they find something at Lady Patterson. And I think it would be easy to think that what they find there is just the American dream. That's such a quick and like sanitized way to think that that's what they're doing. But I don't think it's that simple.
Yeah.
I think that what they're really finding there is this embodied love that presents them with good news that is not about your life will be so much easier, but your life will be fulfilled. You as a human will be seen and loved. And even if life isn't easier for you, the good news is it will actually be a good life. And so I think, part of the quote that you pulled out from their report at annual conference this year talked about these pairs, these duality of things that they encounter, but they didn't see a border. The quote said, "We don't see the border, we see a bridge and we walk it." And I was like, that's it. That's the whole ball game right there. Is it just to what we see, how we choose to see it. It's not just because we're not worried about the political boundary there. We're just trying to reach people. And not for our own aim, but because the love of Christ compels us. To see people and to be moved by them. And to move toward them. And that is actually what saves us from apathy and grasping for power. Is the love of Christ that we have for others.
Absolutely.
Which is, then we put that into action. And you talked about that with embodied action. I think if we're talking about, okay, so then what does this look like for us and Katy with our families? I've been trying to think of like questions we can ask our kids. Does that make sense? Like just in general, each week I've been trying to think of, to start conversations or to start conversations that'll move to action. How did you feel loved this week? Right? And how did you show love this week? Either one, whatever feels more appropriate in the moment or both at some point, maybe not back to back because it's not a to-do list, right? But just in a casual conversation. How did you feel loved this week? How did you show love this week? If we start setting that as like something that our kids call to mind, I think that could be really powerful.
I agree. And I think I was trying to think of, like, I like that question because it's both asking them to engage, but also to know some of their own self-worth. And I think that, I think these concepts that Paul's praying for are, they're not just like little one-time fixes. Like here it comes, the long game. There's things that we have to embed into our body and soul and spirit and to trust. I always think about that language for those of us who believe, like, to really trust on this stuff is hard work. Again, it's not just saying something out loud. Jesus is Lord. But to really trust that with our life, that is a long thing that we learn that has to get into us. I think how Paul is praying for both wisdom and revelation. And at least the way I took that is you're going to need a lot of bit of work on your side, wisdom, and you're going to need quite a bit from God to show stuff to you as well. And so this is sort of like patient, long game of raising kids that trust in what Christ told us was most important, like love and loving others, and that love having action, but also how are you receiving that love? How are you knowing the power that is within you, the goodness and the grace of God that's within you, and you're receiving that. You're not just some, because I think sometimes we can be bad in Christianity where we serve people and we're just kind of like below people, and it's a false humility and we're lesser than. You need both of those. You need that which gives yourself and that which knows your value and your worth. And so you need to both give it and receive it. And that's a hard thing to do. But I think that question, so I'm just digesting your question out loud here.
It's good thoughts.
I think that question is one simple, good way to do that.
Yeah. I've been reading this book, rereading it, but I have forgotten most of it, called Rewilding Motherhood. And the very first chapter talks about your children don't need a martyr, which is true for anybody that we're serving. I'm putting that in quotes. Is they don't need us, like Christ died for everybody. We don't need to. Yeah. Not in the same way.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a very important thing to instill in our kids. This isn't about serving till there's nothing left of you. You have value too.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you have found some inspiration and encouragement for yourself and your family. If you'd like to get our podcast delivered directly to you each week, you can subscribe or follow us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Spotify. For more information about Katy First and upcoming events for your family, because there are a lot of them, because summer.
Because it's summer. Summer!
Visit our website at katyfirst.org. Most importantly, we want you to know this, that in the middle of your ordinary, messy life, whatever that looks like for you in this moment, that you are not alone, you are doing a good job, and you are so, so loved.
And we hope you'll join us on Sunday for, I guess, the second part, Pentecost.
Yeah.
Plus a Pentecost party.
Pentecost party. I'm so excited.
With pizza and cake.
And bounce houses.
And bounce houses.
Yeah. And if you don't have little kids with you, or if you don't want to bounce, nobody cares. If you don't want to bounce, you don't have to be Tigger. If you want to come and just have cake and pizza, great. If you want to come and not have cake and pizza, just come hang out with your church family and sing happy birthday. It's going to be so fun.
It's going to be great. So we hope to see you on Sunday. Have a great week.
Bye.